Imagine discovering that every cell in your body carries a hidden record of a journey that began thousands of years ago. Not written in books, not carved into stone, not preserved inside ancient temples, but encoded in your DNA. For centuries, historians, archaeologists, linguists, and religious scholars debated one of history's most fascinating mysteries. Who are the Ashkenazi Jews? Where did they come from? How did a relatively small group become one of the world's most influential Jewish communities? And why does their DNA tell such an extraordinary story? Some believed they were almost entirely descended from the ancient Israelites. Others argued they were largely Europeans who adopted Judaism during the Roman Empire. Still others pointed toward the mysterious Khazar kingdom of the Middle Ages. For generations, these competing theories divided historians. Each side believed it possessed the truth, but there was one problem. None of them had access to the evidence hidden inside the human genome. Then modern genetics changed everything. Scientists learned how to recover DNA from ancient human remains buried for thousands of years. Every skeleton became a historical witness. Every chromosome became another chapter in humanity's forgotten story. And when researchers compared ancient DNA with that of modern Ashkenazi Jews, the results surprised almost everyone. The truth was neither simple nor expected. It was a story of exile, migration, survival, and one of history's most remarkable human journeys. To understand that journey, we must travel back more than 3,000 years. Long before medieval Europe, long before castles, long before the Roman Empire, the Eastern Mediterranean was home to small kingdoms that would shape world history forever. Among them stood the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. These ancient Hebrew-speaking communities emerged in the hill country of Canaan during the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age. Their people developed a unique religious identity centered on the worship of one God. Jerusalem became their spiritual capital. The temple stood at the center of national and religious life. Pilgrims traveled from distant villages to celebrate sacred festivals. Families gathered to worship together. Priests performed rituals passed down through generations. For centuries, these traditions united the Jewish people, but powerful empires surrounded them. The Assyrians expanded across the Near East. Then came the Babylonians. In 586 BCE, King Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem. The first temple was destroyed. Thousands of Jews were taken into exile in Babylon. It was one of the greatest tragedies in Jewish history, yet it also marked the beginning of something entirely new. For the first time, large Jewish communities existed outside their ancestral homeland. Even after the Persian Empire defeated Babylon and allowed many Jews to return home, not everyone returned. Some families remained scattered throughout Mesopotamia. Others settled in Egypt. Trade connected these distant communities. Religion united them. Although separated by hundreds of miles, they still considered themselves one people. This was the beginning of the Jewish diaspora. Centuries later, another empire rose to dominate the Mediterranean. Rome at first. Roman rule brought relative stability. Jewish merchants established thriving communities throughout the empire. One of the largest Jewish populations outside Judea developed in Rome itself. Families lived alongside Romans, Greeks, Syrians, Egyptians, and countless other peoples. No one realized that these communities would eventually become the ancestors of millions. In 66 CE, tensions between Rome and Judea exploded into open rebellion. Rome responded with overwhelming military force. After years of brutal warfare, Roman legions surrounded Jerusalem. The siege was catastrophic. Starvation spread throughout the city. Disease followed. Finally, in 70 CE, Jerusalem fell. The Second Temple was destroyed. Flames consumed one of Judaism's holiest places. For Jewish history, nothing would ever be the same again. Thousands were killed, thousands more were enslaved. Many fled across the Roman Empire. Some traveled west into Italy. Others moved north. Still others settled throughout the Mediterranean. These migrations would eventually shape the future Ashkenazi population. But no one living at the time could possibly imagine what lay ahead. The refugees who escaped Judea did not arrive in Europe as conquerors. They arrived as survivors. Many had lost their homes. Many had lost their families. Some carried nothing except their faith, their language, and the traditions that had defined Jewish life for centuries. The Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents, making travel easier than ever before. Jewish merchants, craftsmen, and scholars settled in cities connected by Roman roads and sea routes. Communities appeared in southern Italy, Sicily, Greece, and eventually along the Rhine River in what is now Western Germany. These settlements would later become the cradle of Ashkenazi civilization. Life in the Roman world was unlike anything these refugees had known. Roman cities were crowded, multicultural, and filled with people from every corner of the empire. Latin echoed through marketplaces. Greek remained the language of learning. Soldiers marched beside merchants. Philosophers debated in public squares, and ships arrived daily carrying goods from Africa, Asia, and Europe. Jewish communities adapted to this new world while preserving their identity. They built synagogues. They established schools. They copied sacred manuscripts by hand. Children continued learning Hebrew prayers. Even while speaking Greek or Latin in everyday life, generation after generation, these communities survived. Then the Roman Empire began to weaken. By the 4th and 5th centuries, political instability spread across Europe. Germanic tribes crossed Roman borders. Cities declined. Trade routes became less secure. The Western Roman Empire eventually collapsed in 476 CE. For many Europeans, this marked the beginning of the Middle Ages, yet Jewish communities endured. Some families moved northward into the fertile valleys surrounding the Rhine River. Cities such as Mainz, Worms, and Speyer became important centers of Jewish scholarship and commerce. Here, something remarkable happened. A unique Jewish culture slowly emerged. The people living in these communities became known as Ashkenazim. The name came from the Hebrew word Ashkenaz, which medieval Jewish tradition associated with the German lands. Over time, their customs became distinct from Jewish communities living in Spain, North Africa, or the Middle East. They developed unique religious traditions, enact melodies for prayer, enact legal interpretations, and eventually a unique language. That language was Yiddish. At first glance, Yiddish sounds similar to medieval German, but beneath its surface lies a fascinating mixture of cultures. Its grammar developed from German dialects. Its vocabulary included thousands of Hebrew and Aramaic religious words. Later, as Ashkenazi communities moved eastward, Slavic languages added even more expressions. Every sentence reflected centuries of migration. Every word carried echoes of multiple civilizations. For historians, this linguistic evolution suggested a long history of interaction between Jewish communities and their European neighbors. But language alone could not answer the biggest question. Who were the ancestors of the Ashkenazi Jews? Were they still genetically connected to the ancient Israelites, or had centuries in Europe completely transformed their ancestry? For generations, nobody knew. Then, in the 21st century, genetics began providing answers that historians had searched for over hundreds of years. As scientists continued comparing ancient DNA with that of modern Ashkenazi Jews, one conclusion became increasingly clear. The story was never as simple as one migration or one homeland. Instead, it was a journey that unfolded over centuries. Genetic evidence showed strong ancestral links to the ancient peoples of the Levant, the region that includes present-day Israel and surrounding areas. These connections matched historical records describing the origins of the Jewish people. But the DNA also revealed another important chapter. Many maternal genetic lineages pointed toward southern Europe, particularly regions connected to the Roman world. To suggest that, during the Roman period, Jewish communities were not completely isolated. Over generations, some local people joined Jewish communities, marriages took place, and new families were formed while maintaining Jewish religious and cultural traditions. It was not a sudden transformation, it happened slowly, one family at a time, one generation after another. Centuries later, these communities migrated north into the Rhineland and eventually east into Poland, Lithuania, and beyond. The Ashkenazi population experienced what geneticists call a founder event. A relatively small number of families became the ancestors of millions of descendants living today. That is why modern Ashkenazi Jews share many genetic similarities despite being spread across the world: history, archaeology, linguistics, and genetics. All four fields were finally beginning to tell the same story. Not a story of one people replacing another, not a story of a single migration, but the story of an ancient nation that survived exile, adapted to new lands, preserved its identity, and carried its history through countless generations. For nearly 2,000 years, wars changed borders, empires rose and fell, kingdoms disappeared, languages evolved. Yet one community continued to preserve its traditions while quietly writing a new chapter of human history. And this was only the beginning, because the greatest challenges still lay ahead. In the centuries that followed, Ashkenazi Jews would experience remarkable prosperity, but also unimaginable persecution. They would build thriving communities across Eastern Europe. They would become world-renowned scholars, merchants, philosophers, musicians, and scientists. Yet they would also face expulsions, massacres, discrimination, and eventually, the darkest chapter in modern history. How did these experiences shape their identity? How did centuries of survival influence their culture and even their DNA? And what does the latest genetic research reveal about Ashkenazi Jews today that scientists are only now beginning to understand? When Ashkenazi Jewish communities expanded into Poland, Lithuania, Bohemia, Hungary, and later Russia, they entered what would become the golden age of Ashkenazi civilization. Kings and local rulers often welcomed Jewish settlers because they brought valuable skills in trade, finance, craftsmanship, and international commerce. New towns were established, and Jewish neighborhoods quickly became centers of business and learning. For the first time in centuries, many families experienced relative stability. Large synagogues were built, schools flourished, libraries grew, religious scholarship reached extraordinary heights. Some of Judaism's greatest rabbis and scholars emerged during this period, shaping religious traditions that continue to influence millions today. Yiddish became the everyday language of millions of Ashkenazi Jews. Although deeply rooted in medieval German, it absorbed Hebrew, Aramaic, Polish, Russian, and many other languages, reflecting centuries of migration across Europe. Life centered around family, faith, education, and community. Parents encouraged children to study from an early age. Reading and learning became deeply respected values. This emphasis on education helped preserve Jewish traditions despite living far from their ancient homeland. But history rarely allows peace to last forever. As political tensions increased across Europe, anti-Semitism also intensified. Communities that had lived peacefully for generations suddenly faced accusations, discrimination, and violence. Fat rumors spread during times of crisis. Economic hardships often led rulers to blame Jewish minorities. Entire communities were expelled from cities where their families had lived for centuries. Still, Ashkenazi Jews survived. Whenever they were forced to leave one region, they rebuilt their lives somewhere else. This cycle repeated itself again and again. Despite unimaginable hardships, their traditions endured. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the Ashkenazi population had grown into the millions. They became one of the largest Jewish communities in the world. During this time, Europe itself began changing rapidly. The Industrial Revolution transformed economies. Universities expanded, scientific discoveries accelerated, Ashkenazi Jews increasingly participated in medicine, mathematics, literature, philosophy, music, law, and science. Many became internationally respected thinkers whose work influenced the modern world. Yet new political movements also emerged. Nationalism spread across Europe. Old prejudices gained new forms. Although many Jewish families integrated into wider European society, anti-Semitism never completely disappeared. Then the 20th century arrived. It brought the darkest chapter in Ashkenazi history. The Holocaust, under Nazi Germany, approximately 6 million Jews were murdered during World War II. The overwhelming majority were Ashkenazi Jews from Central and Eastern Europe. Entire communities disappeared. Ancient synagogues were destroyed, schools closed forever, languages nearly vanished. Families whose histories stretched back centuries were erased within only a few years. For geneticists, this tragedy also represented the loss of countless unique family lineages. Entire branches of human history disappeared forever, yet even after unimaginable destruction, survivors rebuilt their lives. Some immigrated to the newly established State of Israel. Others settled in the United States, Canada, Australia, South America, and many other countries. Once again, migration shaped Ashkenazi history. Once again, survival became the defining theme. In recent decades, advances in DNA sequencing have allowed scientists to study Ashkenazi ancestry with unprecedented precision. The evidence consistently points toward a population formed through the blending of ancient Levantine Jewish ancestors with Southern European populations during the Roman period, followed by centuries of relative isolation and growth in medieval Europe. Rather than proving one old theory completely right or another completely wrong, genetics revealed something far more interesting. Human history is rarely simple. Populations move, families intermarry, cultures evolve, religions preserve identities across continents, DNA records every chapter today. Millions of people around the world proudly identify as Ashkenazi Jews. Their ancestors survived exile from ancient Judea. They survived the fall of Rome. They survived medieval persecution. They survived expulsions. They survived pogroms. They survived the Holocaust. And through every generation, they preserved traditions stretching back thousands of years. Modern science has not replaced history. Instead, it has confirmed much of it while filling gaps that written records could never explain. The story hidden inside Ashkenazi Jewish DNA is ultimately not about race. It is not about superiority. It is not about politics. It is about resilience. It is about memory. It is about the extraordinary ability of human communities to preserve identity across centuries of change. From the hills of ancient Israel, to the streets of Rome, to the villages of medieval Germany, to the towns of Poland and Lithuania, to modern cities across the globe, the journey has lasted more than 2,000 years. Every generation added another chapter. Every migration left another mark. Every family carried a small piece of history forward. Today, that history lives not only in ancient manuscripts or archaeological ruins, but also in the DNA of millions of descendants. The hidden origins of the Ashkenazi Jews are no longer just a mystery debated by historians. They are one of the clearest examples of how archaeology, history, linguistics, and modern genetics can work together to uncover humanity's forgotten past. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this: empires fall, borders change, kingdoms disappear, but a people's identity, carried through faith, culture, family, and memory, can survive for thousands of years. That is the remarkable story of the Ashkenazi Jews. And it is a reminder that every one of us carries a history far older than we can imagine, written silently inside our DNA.